Thank you, Bill. So yes, I have the pleasure today to share with you my story. It's a couple of stories. I've had the luck, the misfortune of trying to build a startup in two of the most dysfunctional industries on the planet. So Hollywood and Silicon Valley. In my previous life, as I like to tell people, I worked in visual effects. So we started in Adelaide. We had an office in Sydney. We worked on Harry Potter, we worked on Lord of the Rings, we worked on Batman, Superman, all of these sorts of films doing computer-generated imagery. But the story that I want to tell you mostly about today is CultureAmp, the company that I founded almost 7 years ago, although in its current form it's probably more like 5 years old, with the co-founders that I'll talk a little bit about as well. So I know some of you don't have long, so I'll give you the TLDR version of my story, and then I'll spend the rest of the time backfilling it and adding a little bit more color. So, how do you build a company? You write down a really naive business plan, you launch your first product, you move to another city, you bring on 3 co-founders, you kill that first product and launch another one, you kill that product and go back to another idea that you'd had earlier but didn't think was a good one at the time, you hire your first employee, you get your first customer 4 weeks after having the first idea. You bootstrap that to about $1 million in revenue, largely by winning most of the companies in the Valley as your customers. You do a $6.3 million Series A out of the Valley with the guy that helped shepherd Google Analytics, and he joins your board. You open an office in New York. You raise a $10 million Series B. You open an office in London, and voila, you have about 1,000 customers. You have about $10 million in revenue, you have about 100 people, and you have all these amazing companies around the world that you work with. And you've built this platform that makes it easy to collect, to understand, and to act on employee feedback. And after going through those phases, getting a company from 0 to 1 million, getting a company from 1 to 10 million, we're now at the point where in the next 3 to 4 years, our goal is to get to $100 million in revenue, which is a sort of mythical number in the Valley. It's the thing which allows you to be called a unicorn. More importantly, though, it's actually a mark of you've built a real company. That's the point at which people think, okay, you've actually created something of scale. And as interested as I am in building that company, in getting to $100 million in revenue, and I'll dig in a little bit where that number comes from for me personally, I'm actually more interested in what we build along the way. So it's about how do I build a culture-first company at that sort of scale? Because that's actually the legacy that I want to leave. Yes, I want to be financially successful. Yes, I want to make my investors like Blackbird tons of money so they can invest in other companies like you. But really, getting to that point just gives me the right to talk about what we did. So I often use a sporting analogy, which is if you go play the game a different way and you don't win, nobody cares. If you play the game a different way and you get to the premiership, you win the premiership, you actually change the way the game is played. And so a lot of what we're doing at CultureAmp is not just about getting to success, but getting to success in a certain way. So, how do you go from Hollywood to Silicon Valley? What leads somebody to want to step aside? So I was in Hollywood for 13 years. I started as a software engineer, I worked as an artist, I worked as a supervisor, I ended up as the CEO for 5. And 3 years before I left, so in 2006, we won the South Australian Entrepreneur of the Year service category. And I actually went to Melbourne for the judging day, and I met these 2 young guys by the name of Mike Cannon-Brooks and Scott Farquhar. They had this tiny little, pissy little technology company. My revenue was actually higher than theirs at the time, I think. We became friends. I think we were the last ones left drinking. And we became friends, and over the next 3 years, I'm a slow learner, I came to the realization that their business model was much better than mine. I was a service business for Hollywood. Both of those things are extremely difficult. They had this monotonic revenue curve software business, and their revenue was well in excess of mine by the time we got to 2009. And so I was actually forced with this choice. Do I keep building what I'm doing, or do I try and do something different? Do I try and do something bigger? And it was actually one of the hardest decisions I've had to make. I mean, I was the CEO. I was CEO at 26. I was the CEO of this startup that had become this global visual effects company. It's all I'd ever known. There was a huge opportunity to keep doing it, but something inside me wanted to do more. Something wanted to get out there and create something bigger. And the way I actually made the decision is I went home. Has anybody watched the film Baraka? Anybody in the audience? A few people. Good. If you've seen it, watch it again. If you haven't, you have to watch it. It's a 70mm film by Robert Frick, and there's no overt storyline, there's no dialogue, it's just images of the world. And so I put Baraka on, I took a 6-pack of Cooper's Pale Ale, and I sat down and I decided that by the time I got either to the end of the film or the end of the 6-pack, I would have a decision on whether I was going to go leave and start a company or not. It took one beer and about 10 minutes, and I just had this piece that was the right thing to do. I was going to step out, I was going to try and make it happen. And so I did. And I had the world's most naive business plan, somewhat Atlassian inspired. 10,000 by 10,000 equals 100 million. That was the company I was going to build. I didn't know what it was, I didn't know what the product was or anything. I just had this desire, I wanted to build something of scale. And it's a massively simplistic business model. But it's actually been something that's been true and through the way we've thought about the company since the beginning. And having spent all this time in Hollywood, I really wasn't aware of the power of story until I came and tried to start a technology company. There's incredible power in simple narratives. There's incredible power in having something that you can repeat over and over again until people are so sick of it that they actually start to understand it. And so this concept of 10,000 by 10,000 equals 100 million has become our sort of drum. You know, we've just passed 1,000 customers and everybody knows what we're focusing on next. What did we look like on day one? This is what we looked like on day one. This was our launch page. And it came from, I sat down and said, okay, I want to do 10,000 by 10,000. What's that going to look like? And I kept thinking about what problem am I interested in? And it's a little bit of what Mike was talking about earlier this morning. It wasn't necessarily just how do I want to change the world, but what problems really annoyed me? What problems really got to me? And I used to joke that as a CEO, I'm a glorified psychiatrist. My job all day and night is people. And so I started thinking about how could I use software? How could I use software to help scale people and culture? And the problem that we actually started out on was performance reviews. I used to have a Twitter feed of success factors sucks. That was my motivation. Everybody complaining about this tool called Success Factors was ammunition for me building a better way of doing it. Performance reviews were considered something nobody liked. They were once a year. They were backward looking. How could we change that and make that a continuous coaching conversation? And so the original product was called Resonance. We changed the name to Cadence. We started working on this idea of we wanted you to be able to give feedback, but before you could give feedback, you had to have something to give feedback on. So we created like a sort of Slack-style communication tool. We realized that marketing this stuff is really hard. We actually built a really great website, and then the one I showed you just before actually worked about 10 times better. So as soon as you told somebody anything about the product, they stopped signing up. So we got a little bit better, and we started really thinking about the message. We created our first sort of video, our first animation, to try and understand how this is going to work in an organization. And I'd been working on this problem for about 2 years. When I started with the co-founders, 2 of which are in the audience here, and I'll talk a little bit about co-founders specifically, we worked on it together for, I think, 6. Doug was telling me 8. I'm going to stick with 6. 6 months until we realized this really isn't working. We're just not getting the traction. We had paid customers. We had a product. We had people that liked it. But we'd go see someone and they'd say, yes, I understand the problem. But there was no universal solution. There was nothing that everybody wanted that we could give them. And so, long sales cycles, things were still dragging out. And so after 6 months, we said, all right, we need to open ourselves up to building something different. So we sort of put that on ice. We kept it there because people were paying. And we started on a second product. Has anybody read the Checklist Manifesto by Adil Gawand? Amazing book by a surgeon who writes the New York Times around the power of checklists in quality. And it sounds kind of banal, but it's actually very, very well written. And the idea that we had was maybe we could use this as a way of doing business process management. So rather than thinking of it as a heavyweight process tool, what if the way you shared processes was you just documented them? So a sort of GitHub for processes, if you will. And so we built this. We built a website, we put it out there, we talked to people, we pitched the idea, and after 6 weeks, we killed it. We got better. We'd learned a little bit about what it actually meant to build something that was meaningful and real for people. And as 4 engineers who'd started a company, it took us a while to realize that the real question was not could you build it, but would anybody care? We'd spent so much of our time trying to focus on the technical problems, we really hadn't understood what people needed and wanted. So that brought us to the third one. And this was actually an idea that we'd had early, and we ended up bringing Dr. Jason McPherson on. And he has a PhD in clinical psychology, and he did his PhD with my wife. And I came home one day and I said, "How smart is Jason?" And she said to me, "1, he's the person the stats lecturers go to when they have a problem. And 2, if you hire him, I'll let you put more of our money into the company." So we hired him. And the problem that we wanted to solve was the problem of how you get feedback from your employees. And it wasn't that it wasn't possible. People were using consultants, but it was slow, it was big, it was time-consuming, and it wasn't something that people were getting a lot of value out of. And above all, it was ugly. Jason said something really early on that stuck to me to this day, which is user experience is an overlooked element of statistical validity. Short surveys, not long ones. Interfaces that people actually want to use. And so this core idea was the idea that we decided to go launch. And this time, rather than building any software, we created I think it was 4-page PDF of what the app was going to look like. And I went and pitched it to 10 CEOs and said, "If I build it, will you buy it?" And 4 of them said yes. So we got started. We had our first customer 4 weeks in. And in fact, we were building it so fast that we got that first customer, we launched the capture piece so you could actually collect people's feedback. We hadn't built any of the reporting screens yet. We launched to their employee base as soon as we had the first bit, and we were sort of frantically building the reporting screens out as people were coming online to use them. And so it was this incredible just get in there. And I remember in the early days, I was very lucky to have Scott Farquhar and Paul McCartney as advisors to the business. And I remember this sort of advisor/board meeting where we were talking about, we were working on this new product, we were working on Murmur, which is now called Culture Amp, and just the difference from the first product. We would go in, we'd talk to people, and 2 weeks later they would send us a check, or they would say, "Yes, we want to buy it," and we get a purchase order. And I remember saying to Scott, "This is incredible, this is what product market fit feels like." And he's like, "Yes, I've been trying to tell you, you've been flogging a dead horse for a year, but you didn't realize until you got onto a live one." And it is a little bit like that. In the early days, you're working on this product and people love what you're doing. You're trying to solve a real problem. But you keep thinking, I have to add one feature, I have to do one extra thing, and suddenly I'll crack it. And it never comes. And then there's this magical moment where people are buying in spite of the software. They're buying it in spite of all of the problems. And so we were very, very lucky to get some great customers here. And then we got to the Valley at just the right time. So we ended up with Adobe globally as a customer 9 months in. And I remember when we were on the call, and they're calling us and they're saying, "Are you sure you can deliver this? Are you sure you can do this?" At this point, their team working on the project was bigger than our company. And we're like, "Yes, we can deliver this. We can absolutely do this. I've delivered something to Steven Spielberg, I can deliver this to you." And it was sheer bravado. And we found out afterwards that the person who signed off on it, actually her mentor in the business said, "This is a career-limiting move if this goes wrong for you." And she says, "I know, but I trust these guys. They will deliver." That's a huge bet on her part. It's very easy to forget who has to believe in you along the way. So we went through that all bootstrapped. We didn't raise any money. And we got to about $1 million in revenue. And having now gone through we're at the third phase. So we've done the 0 to $1 million, we've done the 1 to 10 million, and we're now embarking on the 10 to 100. And there's a Jason Lemkin post that I think captures it perfectly. Because between 1 and 10 million, you will almost die twice. Your company is exploding, you're having to deal with all of these new things you don't have processes for, you've got big customers and big demands. It's really, 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 really hard. But as Jason Lemkin says, that's okay, because getting from 0 to 1 is impossible. You've already done that. Now it's just merely hard. So that first phase, I was looking at this as I was preparing these slides, trying to remember, what bits of wisdom could I give you and how we got from 0 to 1. I don't know. Lots of hustle, lots of luck, lots of effort, lots of incredible things that people did along the way. And one t-shirt. So this isn't actually the first t-shirt. I couldn't find a picture of the first t-shirt. We have a few museum editions of it somewhere. But we were preparing for one of our first conferences, and we were like, we have to have a t-shirt. What do you put on your t-shirt? And we were throwing ideas around, trying to come up with a phrase, and I saw somebody walk past with data nerd. One of us saw somebody walk past with data nerd, and we started flipping on that idea, and somebody said people geek, and we went, I guess so, and we wrote it down, and then we didn't have a better idea, so we put it on a t-shirt. And then the funny thing happened. People started using it. And the tipping point was at Pinterest. There was a person at Pinterest. We turned up for a meeting, and he was wearing a People Geek t-shirt. But it wasn't one of ours. Where did you get the t-shirt from? He's like, I just loved it so much I made them myself. And when your customers are making t-shirts with your slogan, that it's working and you shouldn't change it. And this has actually become a hugely important part of how we think about growing our business. It's not just about the customers we have. It's actually about a community that is bigger than us. It's about creating a community of people geeks that want to come together to actually think about things in a new way, to bring data to bear on people and culture. So in everything I've said so far, it all sounds relatively easy. Something that, just happens. You just got to turn up. The truth of the matter is, in the journey, it's hard. I mean, how many people in the room are thinking about or want to or have just started a company, started a business? Okay. So the truth of the matter is 90% of you will fail. That's the way it works. Now, you're probably not in this room unless you go, I like those odds. I can do that. And so, that bravado will last for a while. Now, I was 2 years into this, and I was previously the CEO of this company. I had all of this stuff. I had 150 people, and I was able to pay my bills. And I remember lying at home, just crying, just going, why am I doing this? Like, what is driving me? Why am I putting my wife, my 2 kids? We'd moved to Melbourne. The only place we could get, because we had a dog, was a house out in the suburbs, and I hated the house. And I was looking around going, why? Why am I doing this? Starting a startup is a very egocentric thing. And it's something that you'll struggle with the whole way through. And this is actually, I've tried to find out where I originally got these lines from, but this is the line that actually got me through that whole period, which is, what matters is how many people believe in you, not how many people don't. All you need to do is look around and find it. To begin with, it might only be one person. It might be your spouse or your children, or if none of them, might be your dog. Somebody needs to believe in you, and that's what you have to focus on. You need to focus on the people that believe in you. All of the people that say that you can't, ignore them. We've had so many people along the way say that we're fools, that we're never going to amount to anything, that we're arrogant, prideful, all of these things. The other bit that helps there a lot is co-founders. So the way we got together, people say, how do you find a co-founder? Once again, I say, I have no idea. Like, the way we got together was kind of weird. I moved to Melbourne. I got invited to a dinner, and at that dinner, met some people who were doing entrepreneurial stuff too, and they invited me to the very early version of Inspire 9 in Cremorne. And so I started hanging out there, working on my thing, and I sat next to Doug and John, who were working on their little startup, Jadoro. And we sat next to each other for literally 6 months, just working on our own businesses. And then one day, we kind of looked at each other and said, you know what, we should probably join forces. Okay. And then we started thinking about that idea, and then they said, actually, there's this other person, Rod, who we wanted to bring in. So if we're going to do it, we should bring him in too. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, okay, I'm going from 100% of my company to 25% of my company. Because if we're going to do it, we're going to do it equally. And that was a tough thing to sit down and decide. But at the end of the day, I knew that if I was going to succeed, I needed other people that I could work with. And I also knew that if I believed in, at that point, I only knew Doug and John. If I believed in them, then I had to believe in their ability to believe in other people. So if they said, bring this guy in, we bring this guy in. And it was the best decision I've ever made. You know, have other people that have shared that journey with you, that you can all talk to each other about what works and what doesn't work. That's what helps you. That's what gives you the reason to get up in the morning and turn up in the office and try and fight for another day. Now, one thing you'll notice when you look at that image, this is my wife came to this idea of compound privilege, where when we founded the company, we were 4 white, male, 30-something IT brunettes. Not a lot of diversity. And in fact, part of the reason we all look the same is that we were some of the few that were afforded the option of being in that place. So Doug used to talk about this. It's this life of compound privilege. All the way along, we were given that little bit extra opportunity. We were given that other little thing that we could do. And it meant we were in the point where we're in the mid-30s where we could actually afford to go start our own company. It's getting better, but it's still not true for everybody. Whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's education, there are all these things that stop people from getting in, and it's not just once. It's time and time again, all these little things that slow you down and have this friction in stopping you from being able to get there. And so one of the things that we think about a lot now is how do we try and reverse some of that? How do we as a company put better things in place to create an environment where other people can flourish, not just white, IT, male, 30-something brunettes? And one of the real tests of any relationship is when you fight, when you actually end up getting to a point where you're arguing. And the 4 of us get on incredibly well because we're all different, and on any particular topic, we'll have different people on different sides, so you don't really get factions on anything. But I remember there was one particular time when John and I, so John's the one on the right, John and I had probably the only real argument we've ever had. We were closing our Series A. We were negotiating some of the terms on it. I was actually in Bali. I was meant to be on a family holiday, first holiday I'd had in a long time. Instead, I was getting up at 4 a.m. and working through to about 1 p.m. so that I could stay on Australian time. And I had this call with John about a question around board seats, and he'd had a very different understanding than I did on what we were intending to do. And he was furious, really, really furious. And so I'm sitting there, my kids are in the pool, and I didn't know what to do. I then had to get on the plane, still unresolved, hadn't been able to speak to him because he wouldn't pick up the phone. Fly back to Australia the whole time, 8 hours or whatever, just sitting there trying to work out, okay, what am I going to do? We've never had a fight like this. I don't know really what we're going to do. And I spoke to one of my best friends, and he gave me a piece of advice that's incredibly valuable, which is, what's your ego in this situation? When you're in a difficult position, when you're really struggling with something, try and understand your own ego in the situation. And it basically came down to how many board seats we had and who was in those boards and the role of the founder. And I realized it was really easy for me to talk about this when I was the CEO because I had a board seat no matter what. We were talking about what was going to happen for the 4 of us when not all of us were on the board anymore. And just that thing of recognizing in myself my own ego and his ego too actually allowed us to walk through that situation, and we came out a lot stronger for it, but it was a really difficult process to realize that you're actually getting into a company where you have to understand what you're all trying to get to, and there's no right answer here, and you're as much to blame as they are. So I want to talk a little bit about raising money. See if you can actually read it, or you can. That's our series. It's not the final term sheet, actually. We ended up negotiating slightly different terms to bring in actually Blackbird and Index. But that was our Series A term sheet. So, raising money. A couple of little things that I'll share with you. Be aware of your own psychology. Raising money is a little bit like Schrodinger's cat. You don't know if you're dead or alive. And it's really weird. Like you're over there talking about taking all these large amounts of money and you get really irritable and you find yourself not very nice to be around and you realize that you're under this incredible stress, but there's no outlet, there's no specific thing that's going to make it happen one way or the other. And it's actually a really curious place. So if you're ever in the fundraising mode, it can be incredibly powerful to talk to other people who have done that before, because they can tell you exactly how it feels and that the way you're feeling right now is okay. And that little bit there is probably one of the most valuable things I can tell you in the entrepreneurial journey. When you get to the point when you have a term sheet, I mean, you can do it before, but when you get to a term sheet, ask other founders for help. Like right at the last minute, I was doing a founder check on one of the VCs that was investing in us, and Jonathan Downey from Airware spent an hour and a half on the phone explaining to me how he'd negotiated his last deal. I learned more in that hour and a half than I had in the 35 years previous, because it was real. It was my term sheet, and he was talking about his term sheet, he was talking about real stuff, and founders will help you. One of the great things about the Valley is people will. I will help you. If you get to the point where you're negotiating a term sheet, just talk to anybody else that's done, and they will give you their feedback, they will give you their advice. Kids and startups. So that's Casper and Zubin. It's sort of prevailing wisdom that it's better not to have kids when you're trying to do a startup. And there's a certain amount of truth to that, because it's much harder to work really hard when you have kids. But one of the things I've reflected on now is that the more at some point in your startup, you will run out of time. You will run out of energy. There's just more things to do than you can possibly do. And you have to learn to say no, you have to learn to give things up, you have to learn to hire other people. Kids, if you have kids, you just get there faster. And that's actually not a bad thing, to actually realize that and have to come face to face with it and have to take that on board. And in terms of building a company, it makes a big difference to the people that come into your company. So I was talking to somebody else at Culture the other day, and she was saying how the fact that I leave, and I do, on a Friday at 3 o'clock because I coach my son's basketball team, makes it okay for other people to have kids. Makes it okay for other people to bring their whole selves and their real life to work. And our first customer for Culture Amp, for the product that we have today, was Save the Children Australia. We got that because I met the CEO at a kid's birthday party. So there's all these things that come from having kids. But if you have kids and you're actually going through the process of a startup, the best piece of advice I can give you, and this is from a psychologist in the US who was talking to a hedge fund, or a whole bunch of hedge fund managers, is you have until your kids are 7 to develop a relationship. After that, it's over. And so you can't let your life, your work life, overrule your family life. And we need to remember that we borrow our time at work from people that are actually much more important than the work is. And in startups, it's really easy to forget that fact. The hardest thing that you're going to have to do is people. Obviously, I run a company in that space, but it's true. The psychology of hiring, the psychology of firing, the psychology of growing people, that's the stuff that is the hard work, and that's the stuff that as a CEO and a founder, you can't ask somebody else to do. Other people will do parts of it, but that's your core. If you're going to grow a business, you've got to grow the people with you. When you're growing a company really fast, the hardest thing to do is to grow the people with the company. The best quote that I know about people is Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. That's the thing you have to remember when you're doing this. It's very much about connecting from the heart. So, my advice to those of you who want to start a company: know what you're willing to hurt for. Know what you're willing to cry for. Why are you starting this company? Because it is going to hurt. It is going to hurt a lot. And unless you have a really strong reason for going through that pain, don't. Save yourself and everybody else the trouble. Understand where your ego is. You know, constantly in this, our egos are tested. We have to give up our Lego as leaders. We have to try and understand what are we actually uniquely capable of delivering at this point? What can somebody else do? How can I help somebody else and their ego? Ego is not a dirty word. Like, be okay saying what you need and what you want. And along the way, give back. Now, I know I spoke to Mark earlier that they'd set a goal of getting to 50 people pledging 1%, and I think they've already smashed that today. So hopefully there's a few people that are sitting on the fence. Pledge 1%. It is such a brilliant idea. And the thing from a true startup way is, in pledging it, you don't have to do anything straight away. You can work it out later. We were actually one of the first companies in Australia to pledge. We're still figuring out how to actually do some of it. We've got the pledge 1% in terms of time, we've got the pledge 1% in terms of product, what does that actually mean, and the pledge 1% in terms of equity as well. But as a gesture, as a way of actually connecting back to the world around you, it's incredibly powerful. So what I'd like to leave you with is going back to my Hollywood days. Probably the best advice I can give any entrepreneur and any person that wants to start a business. So from the pursuit of happiness.
I'm going, bro!
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know, you'll probably be about as good as I was. That's kind of the way it works, and I was below average. So you'll probably ultimately rank somewhere around there, so you'll excel at a lot of things, just not this. I don't want you out here shooting this ball around all day and night, all right?
All right.
Okay? All right, go ahead. Hey. Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. All right?
All right.
You got a dream, you got to protect it. People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You want something, go get it. Period. Let's go.
And I'll finish with my favorite quote, which is an anthem to entrepreneurship. People who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those that are doing it. Thank you.
Great stuff.
We can sit up the top so we've got better
Sure.
eye lines.
So, 4 white brunettes. I used to be a brunette. That time is long past. A couple of interesting things that you said there that I just wanted to follow up on. But first I want to get one thing straight. So you were CEO of Rising
Sun Pictures.
Rising Sun Pictures. They won an Oscar, by the way. So very successful. You decided to drink a beer and watch a weird movie.
Yep.
And started a company.
That's how it works.
So what? Then you had a whole bunch of ideas that didn't work. How did you know they were not going to work? How did you finally sort of land on the idea that was going to work?
I think that was what took us 2 years to work out,
Right.
was that it wasn't working.
Right.
You get the illusion of success, you hustle your way in, you get some customers, and at the end of the day, I can't really say anything other than you'll know traction when you see it. And if you think you haven't got traction, you probably don't.
Right.
And it just took a while going back to the ego, it took a while to accept that, to realize that idea wasn't actually working, and we should try another one. And you don't want to go too far the other way. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, try this, and I ran a smoke test, and I didn't get enough people to sign up, so I'm not going to do it. You won't achieve anything that way. Like, the whole point of it is you've got to believe in something that other people don't believe.
Yeah.
But at some point, people have to go on the journey with you.
Right. And how did you know with Culture Amp, how did you figure out that the traction was actually meaningful?
It's just how quickly deals closed. I mean, it was just so different. We would walk in and we'd explain the problem, we'd show it to somebody, and they're like, yeah, I can use this. And obviously we didn't close every deal, but people were buying it, people were using it, people were wanting to do things.
Yeah.
And so it was really in the market where we saw it change.
So when I know when Blackbird invested, one of the things that we debated sort of internally was, we did the analysis, we really loved you guys, we loved the market space, and you and I had this sort of endless discussion about, is your product a one-use, an employee review thing sort of happens once a year. Is the utility value only going to happen once a year, and then it sort of sits on the shelf after that? Talk about that, and did you have that concern, or did you see further into the future and know that it would be used on a daily basis with these pulse surveys and things like that. What was the thinking there?
So this is actually one of my endless frustrations when talking to VCs. So you'll go
We're
to
too short-sighted?
No, it's this thing where you'll go with this idea, and people are buying the idea, and then they'll look at it and go, okay, that's great, but what next? And it's also what they're good at, and so you start talking about, suites and total addressable markets and all these things. But early on, for me, I looked at it and I just thought, there's $2 billion a year being spent on employee surveying with crappy surveys that suck.
Yeah.
I'll go get some of that. And then the idea was that, and having tried to build something that was much more progressive, much more focused on a whole bunch of other things, and seeing how hard it was for people to wrap their arms around it, it was pure faith that here is a well-known problem that has a money or time budget attached. I can solve that problem. If I solve that problem, I can then start working on the stuff that they're not doing today, which they should be doing, which is the longer story.
Yeah.
And so I think at some point I had in one of my decks a picture of a vitamin and a painkiller strapped together. And so it's like the product we have today is the painkiller, that's the one that they need. But the thing they actually need to be healthy is the vitamin.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that we're focusing on now, which is like, how do you embed not just an engagement survey, but as anybody who's run them knows, it's not the doing the survey that matters, it's what you do with the data.
Right.
So how do we take people on that journey? How do we help people actually do something with it at all levels of the organization? So organizational level, manager level, and individual level. And that's where a lot of our future growth will come from.
Okay, so today, I mean, I know you have sort of a really scalable business that's really starting to work. But what did you have to do in the very beginning that was sort of non-scalable to sort of get to scalable? I mean, what tips can you sort of offer? Were there things that you had to do that took a lot of time, a lot of effort, that's completely non-scalable, but was necessary for success?
There's some members of my team in the audience here who will attest to the fact that we still do things that don't scale, and probably will for a little while. I used to joke that one of the ways that we won customers is we were better at using Excel than they were. And so they'd have to solve a certain problem. I said, just send me the file and I'll recut it and send it back to you, and then you can use it and you'll solve your thing. And so a lot of it early was just taking friction out.
Right.
They needed to do this thing, but to do that thing, there was ABC steps before.
Yep.
And we could write a script or we could do something. We did a lot of Excel hacking to help clients get the data that they have into format so that they could do what they need to do with our platform. And then also, I really enjoy this too, spent a lot of time talking to the customers' internal people. So I remember one of our customers get these really bad results back on their culture, and I was explaining to them, it's okay, if they said nothing, if they were apathetic, that'd be worse. This is okay. She says to me, can you tell my board that? Okay. So did the call to the board and stuff, and those things don't scale,
Right.
but they're incredibly good learning experiences, actually going and seeing what people are doing with your tool.
Yeah. And one of the things that I was interested in was this, and I don't think it's talked about enough, but a lot of businesses fail because founders actually fight.
Yeah.
And that's not talked about enough. And so you had this big, brouhaha with one of your founders, one of your co-founders. So what did you do sort of afterwards? I mean, have you created some sort of a platform for fighting that actually works, or how do you avoid not chopping each other's heads off when you are at a point of disagreement?
See, the funny thing is we actually didn't have to change anything.
Okay.
So, the four of us get on really well. We all think differently. And one of our sort of unspoken things was that we should work stuff through together. If somebody wasn't there, then we'd keep going till they were. And we've never made a unilateral decision.
Yeah.
We all have different roles. I'm the CEO, VP of product, we have VP of engineering. John was the VP of marketing until very recently. And so we kind of all made decisions in our areas. And so we were pretty good at not turning things that were business questions into founder questions.
Yeah.
So we weren't coming, it wasn't one of us saying, hey, I think we should do X as a founder. It's like, well, you saying that as the CEO or are you saying that as the founder?
Right.
There's a difference. And when we actually I certainly relied on it. Like I knew that I'm quite impulsive. I like understanding things relatively quickly, and I like crazy ideas. And so I could go to my founders and say, hey, what about this? And if they go, I'm like, okay, it's probably too crazy. If they're like, actually, that's not a bad idea, then I didn't have to self-censor anymore. Okay. So it was actually really useful. That particular situation worked its way out, and part of it, I honestly, was just me learning how to manage my psychology rather than asking John to change.
Right.
And that made a massive difference, not because we did things differently afterwards, but just because I realized so often, somebody else once said to me, every time you point a finger at somebody, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. And it's so true in founder relationships and personal relationships and all these things.
Yeah, one of the things you just said I'm sort of fascinated by, and that is, you're a co-founder of this business, so there's 4 of you.
Yep.
And in the beginning, you were all co-founders wearing many hats, doing all kinds of things, but now you're the CEO. So what's the difference? What does your team want from you as a co-founder, and then what do they want from you as a CEO, and what's the difference?
So I'm sort of a strange creature in the sense that at one point, a company tried to buy us, and they went through the whole process, and we had all these interviews, and so they said to me, what role do you want if we buy you? And I was like, I don't know. What do I do? What am I qualified to do? I've been a CEO since I was 26. CEOs are kind of good at some things and useless at most things. And so inside a bigger organization, it wasn't clear what I would do. So I've been the CEO of Cultramp since the beginning. When we got together, we sort of divvied up sort of what we were focusing on, and that was one of the things that we agreed from the beginning. As a CEO, there are different types of CEOs. The way I tend to focus is I quite like the sort of culture, strategy, and cash. Basically, the 3 things that I uniquely have to make sure are being looked at. Not that I have to do everything on all of those, I can't, but I have to be the buck on those 3 things. I have to make sure that we have a strategy. It doesn't have to be mine, just have to make sure we have one. I have to make sure that the culture, culture first company, I have to make sure that the culture comes first, and then I have to make sure we're not going to run out of cash.
Right.
So those 3 things are my job as the CEO. I think as founders, what people want is they want you to do 2 things which are mutually contradictory at times, but essential. One is they want you to help them dream. They want you to think big, to be audacious, to say, hey, we're going to do something that most people think we can't do. At the same time, they want you to give them the space to do that too.
Sure.
You have to learn to give up your Lego. You have to allow other people to do it. And so it's this very strange mix of how do I inspire you? How do I help you think about something bigger than you might otherwise think about? But how do I do it in a way that's not telling you my vision?
Yeah.
It's got to be your vision too.
Right.
And so increasingly, I think Mike said it earlier, which is, a lot of what he and Scott do is go around and champion things.
Sure.
You're a symbolic gesture, and that's true as a CEO too. Like half the meetings I'm in, and I had this conscious realization. I'm in the meeting because I am the CEO. I'm not in the meeting because I am Didier.
Right.
A little hard for my ego, but eventually you realize that you have a role to play.
Right.
Turn up, introduce people, make sure that everybody feels happy. You're giving them the symbolic needs that they have. And that's not to belittle it. Like you can only be in so many places, so you have to choose where you can be to send the right message.
Yeah.
But a lot of it becomes that.
Right.
It's where can you be to support someone else? And the thing that's probably made me the happiest in a long while is we did a hackathon on last week, and 3-day hackathon, and it was phenomenal. Just the way it worked, the way the teams worked, the way the people worked. I did nothing. Like it was not my idea. I was not involved in the creation of it. I would have loved to have been, but I was blown away with what they were able to do.
Oh, that's great.
And so just to create the space to make that thing happen.
That's great, and give them the freedom to be able to do that. If you have any questions, let's ask them now, and we'll put them up on the screen because we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. So what's the, you sort of came from Hollywood land to Peopleland, as I said. What's the difference between sort of how Hollywood works and how you guys work? Is there a major difference? Is it the same, or what can people who are starting businesses learn from how Hollywood does it, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing you can learn from Hollywood is storytelling.
Right.
So like one of my favorite books is The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And it really talks about the archetype of storytelling and how storytelling works. And as a CEO, as a salesperson, as someone working on product, as somebody working on culture and strategy, it all boils down to story. It boils down to your ability to tell somebody a story that elicits some emotion in them, gets them to act. I actually didn't realize, like I knew it technically when I was in Hollywood, because I kind of knew the form and to follow it, but it wasn't until I was actually trying to run a company and I sort of had to reach around for a tool and went, like this is what I should do. And there was actually this moment, I was in New York on a panel, and there was a woman sitting next to me, Dr. Leanne Renninger, and she's a PhD in how we transmit information, basically. And so I was talking, and she was sitting next to me, and then she spoke next, and then she said, the funniest thing just happened. She said, I was sitting here in my head thinking through what I was about to say, and then I noticed, because she's trained to notice these things, the whole audience shifted forward. And she said, what's going on? She looked at me, Didier's telling a story. And it wasn't that I was a great storyteller, I was following the form. I was engaging people in that process, and it changed the mood. And so just learning that has been probably the most valuable thing from Hollywood.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of reinforce that, because I think, many times when we have people who come in and pitch us, we fall in love with the story, with the people, of course. But if great storytelling has the ability to enhance all kinds of things, so that's great. Okay, well, I wanted to do one other thing with you, since so we'll sort of end on this. But Didier also has a spouse who is sort of a world-class singer. So you've got entertainment in your family, you come from Hollywood land. So I thought we would sort of borrow James Lipton's sort of closing. James Lipton is the guy who has a television show called Inside the Actor's Studio, and he's got a very famous set of questions. So they're sort of rapid fire questions, and some of you may know them, some of you may not. So we're going to ask Dr. Elzinga what he thinks about this.
Dr. Elzinga.
Yeah.
I wish.
So, Didier Elzinga, what is your favorite word?
Courage.
What is your least favorite word?
Dull. I don't like the sound of it. It's onomatopoeic in a
Right.
way.
I mean, what turns you on?
Belief.
What turns you off?
Dogma.
Why dogma?
There's just, it goes back to story form. So you see people using a particular approach, and you realize they're actually not thinking about the problem. They're trying to hammer something through, and it annoys me. It's just one of those things that just gets me when I see it.
Yeah. What sound or noise do you love?
Probably the sea.
And what sound or noise do you hate?
Slamming doors. My family will attest to that. Can't stand it.
What is your favorite curse word?
Anything in Dutch. So Dutch is a very expressive language. My dad is Dutch.
So
So-
give us an example.
Godverdomme is a good example, but which means goddamn. But even you could say, like somebody once swore at me when I was in the Netherlands, and it was, forgive anybody who can speak Dutch, I'm going to mangle this, but it was something like gek de appel flapjak, which is basically you crazy apple pancake. It's all in the emotion and the that goes with it. So anything in Dutch.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I don't know about profession, but if I wasn't running Culture Amp, I'd be building an Oculus Rift storytelling company. Building an Oculus Rift storytelling company.
Very cool. And what profession would you not like to do?
Air steward. I fly on planes, I feel sorry for them all the time.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you enter the pearly gates?
Going with the same theme, you've been upgraded.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, Didier Elzinga.
Do you want me to try and answer those three questions?
We've got, I wonder if we
I've got
could...
2 minutes, I can answer those three questions.
Could we put those two questions back up, please? Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. So what is the biggest mistake founders make about culture?
I think the biggest mistake founders make is not repeating themselves. And it's one of the things you realize is it's not until you've said something to the point where you are physically sick of saying it that people will hear it for the first time. So it's very easy to go away and get inspired and come up with a story and tell one person and then think you've done culture.
Yeah.
You know, think you've expressed something and it will magically propagate out. It doesn't. You have to work at it really, really hard. You have to constantly repeat the message. And you have to, whatever you think is important, whatever you think it is that the culture of the business needs to be, you need to reinforce that. So, I mean, I guess there's a meta one behind that, which is not caring about culture.
Right.
But let's assume everybody does. If you do care about culture, probably the biggest mistake people about is just not repeating the message enough.
Yep. And one of the things you talked about was compound privilege and how some people have it and some people don't. So how do you actually reverse it? You've done a lot of thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had an easy, glib answer for it, and I don't. I think one of the first things, I was talking to a writer on this topic, and she made the comment to me, she studied anthropology, that one of the hallmarks of privilege is that if you have it, you can't see it. And so I think probably the first step is actually just going from that unconscious incompetence to the conscious incompetence phase, that we won't necessarily fix it or remove it, but by being aware of it, it stops being quite as insidious as it is, because you don't make the sorts of comments that people make, like, oh, well, we'll hire them, but only if they're at this level, or if only if they've gone to that university, they've only done this thing. You sit down and say, well, there's a whole heap of reasons why those things aren't true, not all of which lead to them not being the right person.
Great stuff.
I'll answer the very last one, because
Okay.
I actually almost had a slide on that.
All right. How do you decide what to charge for your product?
Anything works. We just made it as simple, as cheap as possible, and we had so many conversations about pricing. Pricing is a horrible black hole that will consume everybody's resources for way too long. The best thing we did was we came up with a pricing model, and then when we started arguing about it, we said, we'll look at it when we get to 100 customers. Don't even worry about it. Get to 100 customers, then do it later. So how do you decide what to charge for your product? Delay the decision as long as possible. Make it as cheap and simple as possible, and just get on with building the business, because pricing is not going to fix it 0 to 1.
Yeah.
Pricing is a 1 to 10 problem.
Right. Great
Awesome.
stuff. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.